There is a man who has never recorded a single beginning. Not a birth, not a wedding, not the first light of a new year. For 61 years, he has recorded only endings. The last breath of dying stars, the final word of a dying language, the closing note of a song no one will ever play again. He calls it his collection. Tonight, he adds one more piece to it. And tonight, for the first time, it will be his own. His name is Anwar Servan. He was once an astronomer, not a famous one, but a patient one. At 26, he watched a star through his telescope for 11 straight nights, waiting for it to die. On the 11th night, it did. A final flare of light, hundreds of years old by the time it reached his eye, and then nothing. He wrote the exact time in a small notebook. Not because anyone asked him to, because he felt someone should. That single notebook became a habit. The habit became a purpose. And the purpose became a life spent chasing final moments. The rest of the world was too busy to notice. He traveled to monasteries as the last monk of a dying order recited a prayer no one would repeat again. He sat beside a soldier's cot as the man spoke his last coherent sentence, not about the war, but about the smell of bread from his childhood home. He stood in the back of a concert hall the night an orchestra played its final performance before the hall itself was demolished. Endings, Servan believed, held more truth than beginnings. Beginnings are full of promises. Endings are full of honesty. By the time he reached his 50s, Servan's collection was no longer a hobby. It was an archive. Each brass disc was engraved with a date and a place. Turn it over and a single sentence. The last true thing someone said, or the last true thing he witnessed. He organized them not by importance, but by silence. The quietest endings on the top shelf, the loudest wars, collapses, farewells shouted across train platforms on the bottom. He believed the quiet ones mattered most because no one else was there to hear them. In a fishing village on the northern coast, he met an old sailor who had spent 40 years at sea and was now going blind. "The last thing I want to see," the sailor told him, "isn't my ship. It's the exact color of the sky the morning I first left home." Servan sat with him for 3 days until the sky matched almost the color the old man remembered. On the third evening, the sailor closed his eyes and said, "Close enough." Servan wrote down the words. Then he wrote down the color. He never learned the sailor's name. Some endings, he had learned, didn't need one. In a mountain town whose name no map still carries, Servan met a blacksmith named Ilian Rusk, the last of a family that had worked the same forge for 4 generations. The factories had come. The orders had stopped. And on a gray autumn morning, Rusk lit his furnace for the final time. Not to finish a commission, but simply to feel the heat one last time before the forge went cold forever. Servan stood in the doorway and watched him work an unnecessary piece of iron, shaping it into nothing in particular, just to hear the sound his hammer made against the anvil, a sound his father had made, and his father's father before him. When the iron cooled, Rusk set down his hammer and did not pick it up again. 4 generations, he said, and no one will remember the sound of it. Servan told him he would. He recorded the final strike, not the words this time, but the sound itself, preserved on a wax cylinder he carried everywhere. It remains to this day the only sound in his entire collection. Further south, in a coastal fortress town, Servan found a man named Basil Thorne, keeper of the last operating pigeon post in the region. For 30 years, Thorne had trained birds to carry messages between villages. The roads did not reach, but the wires had come. Then the telephones and the routes he once flew were declared unnecessary. On the day Servan arrived, only one bird remained, an old gray-winged pigeon named simply 41, after the number of years the post had operated. "This is the last message this post will ever carry," Thorne said, holding a small folded note addressed to no one, tied only for the sake of the ending itself. Servan watched the bird disappear into the darkening sky and never learned where it landed. In a city Servan visited only once, he found a projectionist named Theodore Lang, who had run the same film projector in the same cinema for 38 years, until the cinema was converted to something digital that no longer needed a man threading film by hand. On his final night, Lang came down from the booth, sat in the front row, and watched his own projection like an ordinary member of the audience. When the reel ended, he said quietly, "I have shown this room 10,000 endings. Tonight is the first one that was mine." Servan wrote the sentence down exactly as it was spoken. Years passed this way, one final moment at a time. Servan crossed deserts to record the last words of a dying language, spoken by a man who was the final fluent speaker on Earth. He crossed oceans to witness the last day, a lighthouse operated before it was replaced by an automated signal, an old keeper's final walk up the spiral stairs, lantern in hand, for no reason but memory. Each ending he collected made him more certain of one thing, that the world does not end loudly. It ends quietly, one small unnoticed moment at a time, and almost no one is paying attention. Blacksmiths, sailors, pigeon keepers, projectionists, men whose work had outlived its usefulness, saying goodbye to the only thing they had ever known how to do. Servan had become, without ever intending to, a witness to the slow closing of an entire way of living. One evening, an old friend, a fellow archivist, the only person who ever understood his work, asked him a question Servan had never let himself ask. "You have recorded 1,000 endings, Anwar. Whose will yours be?" Servan said nothing. He went home that night and sat for 6 hours staring at a single blank disc. For the first time in 60 years, he realized his collection had a gap. Not because he had missed an ending, because he had spent his entire life so busy documenting the endings of others, he had never once turned that same attention toward his own life. He began to wonder, had he truly lived, or had he only witnessed? He had held the hands of dying strangers, yet he could not remember the last time someone had held his. He had recorded 1,000 final words, yet he realized with a quiet and sudden grief that he did not know what his own final words would be. He had given his whole life meaning by honoring the endings of others. He had never once written a beginning of his own. That night, Servan made a decision. He would not add his death to the collection. Not yet. Instead, for the first time in his life, he would write something with a beginning. He opened a blank journal, dipped his pen, and instead of recording someone else's final words, he began to write his own. Not an ending, but everything he had never said. Everything he had witnessed. Everything he had learned about the strange, aching honesty of last moments. Weeks later, a boy from the village came to his door, soaked from the rain, holding a small dead bird in his hands. "It stopped moving," the boy said. "I don't know what to do with it." Servan, who had spent his life around endings, understood immediately what the boy was really asking. Not what to do with the bird, but what to do with the feeling. He invited the boy inside. He showed the boy the collection, a lifetime of final moments, carefully kept, carefully honored. "Why do you keep all of this?" the boy asked. Servan considered the question longer than he had considered anything in years. "Because someone should notice when something ends," he said. "The world moves too fast to notice on its own. So I decided to be the one who does." He placed a blank brass disc into the boy's hands. "This one is yours, Guy," he said. "Not for the bird, for whatever you decide is worth remembering." The boy stayed for hours, listening to stories of sailors and blacksmiths and pigeon keepers and songs that no longer existed. He asked if Servan was ever afraid that no one would remember him the way he remembered everyone else. Servan admitted he had thought about it often and had never found an answer he trusted. The boy considered this, then said simply, "I'll remember you. That's one person at least." It was not much, as promises go, but Servan found that it was enough. And for the first time in decades, he realized his collection was no longer just his. It had become something larger, not a record of endings, but a quiet argument that nothing which mattered should ever disappear unnoticed. Anwar Servan lived 7 more years after that night. He never did add his own death to the collection. A friend of his, keeping the tradition he had built, did that for him. But he did finish the journal he began that rainy evening, a single quiet record of a life spent noticing what others overlooked. Not an ending, a beginning written far too late, but written all the same. Somewhere in a small room lined with brass discs and quiet stories, someone is still listening for the moment something ends. Because the world rarely announces its endings. It simply waits for someone patient enough and quiet enough to notice. This has been The Drift Hypothesis. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. There are more endings waiting to be found.